3 months after the Alpha King rejected me in front of his entire court, I was dusting the chair he had been sitting in when he did it. I want to be clear that this was not a plan. I am not the sort of woman who plots her way back into the house of the man who broke her. I had simply discovered, in the weeks after, that a rejected mate from a disgraced family has exactly 2 roads open to her, and one of them ended in a river. So I took the other one. I tied my hair the plain way the village women wear it. I traded my one good dress for brown wool. I gave the housekeeper a name that was not mine, and I let the largest household in the territory hire the quietest pair of hands it had ever seen. He did not recognize me. That was the part I had counted on, and the part that, every single day, took something out of me anyway. My name is Marin. In the king's house, I was Pell, which I chose because it was the dullest sound I could think of on short notice, and dullness was the whole of my ambition. I was 25, a woman grown, and 4 months earlier I had stood in the ceremony hall of the Iron Hold in a dress my mother sewed by hand, with a vow folded into my sleeve that I had written myself and never got to speak, while Soren of the Iron Hold, the Alpha King, the strongest wolf in 3 territories, looked at me with no expression at all, and said the words that sever a bond before the whole assembled pack. I will not describe what a public rejection does to the wolf on the receiving end. The pack laws call it severing, and the word is honest. A weaker wolf can die of it. I did not die of it, which surprised a great many people, my own family chief among them, and which I have come to understand meant something I did not understand at the time. I survived it. And then, because surviving is a habit and not a triumph, I came to his house to scrub his floors, and I told myself it was only that I had nowhere else to go. That was the lie. It was a good lie. I kept it the way you keep a coal banked under ash, never letting it catch, never quite letting it die. The truth was that I needed to know why. Because here is the thing no one tells you about being rejected by a man whose wolf has chosen you. The choosing does not stop. The bond he severed in front of 200 witnesses had not, in fact, fully closed. I felt it the first morning I passed him in the gallery, a thread where there should have been a clean scar. A pull toward a man who had every reason to be the last creature on earth I wanted to feel anything toward. I hated it. I hated that some animal part of me, even then, even after, turned toward him like a plant toward a window. I decided I would find out what kind of man does that, chooses a woman with his whole wolf and then humiliates her before his kingdom. And then I would be cured of the thread. And then I would leave. It took me far longer than it should have to understand that I had the question backwards. The Iron Hold is a warm house, which I had not expected. From the outside, it is all black stone and iron, and the kind of grimness that keeps rival packs polite. Inside, it smells of bread and beeswax, and the particular green smell of the herbs Mistress Bryony hangs in the kitchen passage. And the fires are kept high. And the king's library, I learned this slowly, in the way a servant learns the geography of a house she is not supposed to have opinions about. The king's library is the warmest room in it. I was good at being Pell. I was good at being no one. I had a great deal of practice being looked through, having spent 4 months as the most looked-at woman in the territory, for all the wrong reasons. I kept my eyes down. I learned the corridors. I learned which of the warriors were kind and which were not. And I learned the shape of the king's days, the way you learn whether you intend to stay out of. He worked late. He ate little. He did not laugh. Though once I heard his beta, Osric, say something low in the gallery, and saw the corner of the king's mouth move. And the movement was not a smile so much as the memory of where a smile used to live. He kept to 3 rooms, the hall, the study, the library. And he moved through his own house like a man walking the edge of a frozen lake, testing every step. A grieving man. I knew the gate. I had been walking it myself. I did not want to know that about him. It is much easier to scrub the flaws of a man you can despise. The first time he spoke to me directly, I dropped a candlestick. It was in the library. I had thought the room empty. It was past the hour he usually left it, and I was returning a stack of household ledgers to the shelf where Mistress Bryony kept them, and his voice came out of the high-backed chair by the fire where I had not seen him sitting. "You move things and put them back in better order than you found them," he said. "The keeper of the accounts has been complaining for a year that the ledgers are a disgrace. They are not a disgrace anymore. That is you." The candlestick hit the floor. I went down after it before he could, brown and quick and keeping my face turned away, and I heard my own voice come out steadier than I had any right to expect. "I beg pardon, my king. I only set them where they go." "That is precisely my point." A pause. "Look at me." I had spent 4 months in his house, arranging my entire existence around not doing that one thing. I looked at the floor. I looked at the dropped candlestick. I looked at the hem of his dark robe 3 paces away, because he had not come closer. He never came closer. He kept a distance from everyone, like a man who had learned that nearness was a debt that came due. "I am poor at being looked at, my king," I said. "I do better in corners." It should have ended there. A king does not coax a maid. But he was quiet a moment, and when he spoke again there was something underneath the words I had not heard from him in the hall, where he was all iron. "So do I," he said. "Carry on." I carried on. I went down the gallery with my heart doing something undignified, and I told myself it was fear of discovery, and it was, partly, and the rest of it I did not have a name for yet. If you have ever hated someone and then caught them being human when they thought no one was watching, you know the particular vertigo of what came next. I will try to tell it plainly. He began to seek me out. Not as a man seeks a woman. He did not know I was a woman he had ever seen before. That was the whole horror and the whole engine of it. He sought out the quiet maid who put his ledgers in order, the one who did not flinch and did not flatter, and answered him as though he were a person and not a throne. He would find reasons. The accounts wanted copying. The library wanted a second pair of hands among the old rolls. He would say 3 sentences to me and then sit in silence while I worked. And the silence was not the silence of a master tolerating a servant. It was the silence of a man who had not been spoken to like a person in a very long time, and had forgotten he was starving for it. His wolf knew. I am certain of that now. His wolf knew exactly who I was and could not make his mind hear it, and so it did the only thing it could. It kept turning him toward me, baffled, the way the thread kept turning me toward him. Lady Audra noticed before either of us did. I should tell you about Lady Audra. After my rejection, the court had needed a new story, and Lady Audra of the Vale had supplied one. That the king had seen sense, that the disgraced daughter had never been worthy, and that there was, conveniently, a woman of impeccable blood and Eastern alliances already at court who would make a far steadier Luna. She had spent 4 months arranging herself toward the empty place at his side, with the patience of water working at stone. She was beautiful in the way that organises a room, and she had a particular gift for noticing where the king's attention went, because the king's attention was the whole of her ambition. She noticed it going to a maid. She found me in the herb passage, where Mistress Bryony's bundles hang, and she did not come alone. She came with the keeper of the accounts and a steward, which is how a clever woman makes a private cruelty look like a matter of household concern. "The new girl," she said, looking at me the way you look at a stain you intend to have removed. "Pell, is it? No family anyone can name, no village anyone can place. hired in a season when this house should be careful who it lets near its king. She let it sit. There has been a great deal of carelessness in this house lately. I mean to see it corrected. You will be questioned, properly, by the steward, about where you came from and who sent you. A house that nearly seated a traitor as its Luna cannot be too careful about its servants. It was a good move. I will give her that even now. I had no past that would survive questioning. Pell was 4 months old and made of brown wool. One real afternoon, with a careful steward, and I would be exposed, not as the king's rejected mate, which was almost worse, but as a woman travelling under a false name in the household of the most paranoid king in 3 territories, which in those days was the kind of thing that ended at the end of a rope. She nearly had it. The steward set an hour. The keeper nodded along. What Lady Audra did not account for was that the maid she meant to break had spent 4 months with her hands in the king's accounts, and a woman with her hands in the accounts learns whose names appear in the margins of the Eastern grain shipments, and how often, and in whose hand the orders are written. I did not say any of that. I said, "As the steward wishes, my lady." And I kept my eyes down, and I went to find the one thing in that house that could buy me an afternoon's delay. I went to the library, because the king was always in the library, and I had learned that the king outranked the steward. He was at the long table, with the old rolls spread in front of him, and there was ink on his hands, and when I came in he looked up, and something in his face did a thing I had not seen it do. It eased, fractionally, the way a held breath eases. Then he saw I was distressed, and the easing turned to something sharper. "Who?" he said. "Not what is wrong. Who?" As though he already knew that whatever had upset the quiet maid in his library had a name and a face, and he intended to learn both. "It is nothing, my king. A household matter. Lady Audra wishes me questioned about my origins, which is her right." I kept my voice level. "I came only to return these rolls." He set down the pen. For a long moment he did not say anything, and I watched his hands, because noticing is the only weapon I have ever reliably owned, and I noticed that one of his fingers rested on the corner of a folded page that lay apart from the rolls, a single page he had drawn out and set where his hand could reach it, the way you keep near you a thing you cannot put away and cannot bear to look at directly. "There will be no questioning," he said. "You answer to me, not to Lady Audra, and I am satisfied with where you came from." "You do not know where I came from, my king." "No," he said, and he looked at me when he said it, and the look went on a beat too long. "But my wolf is, and lately I have learned to stop arguing with it. Go. Tell the steward the king requires his maid elsewhere." I went, and I would have left it there. I had my afternoon, I had my delay, except that as I turned, my eyes caught the folded page under his hand, and I saw, upside down, and only for an instant, the edge of writing on it. I knew that writing. I had spent a winter learning to make my letters even, at a table by a window, while my mother told me a Luna must write a fair hand, because a Luna signs things that matter. I knew the particular way I closed my open letters. I knew it the way you know your own face in dark water. It was my vow. The one I had folded into my sleeve 4 months ago and never spoken. The one that should have burned with the rest of my disgrace. The king of the Ironhold had it on his table, drawn out where his hand could reach it, worn soft at the fold from handling. If you are still with me, and I find, against everything, that I hope you are, this is the place in the telling where I have to stop and breathe, because it is the place where I stopped breathing the first time. What comes next is the part where I learned what kind of man he actually was, and it was not the part I went looking for. Stay with me through it. And if this is the kind of story you want more of, her side, told in the voice of the woman who lived it, the bell is how you tell me to keep telling them. Press it. I will wait. There. Now let me tell you about the letter. Because I did not sleep that night, and the not sleeping made me reckless, and the next morning when he left the library for the training yard, I did the thing I had spent 4 months not allowing myself to do. I went to his table, and I unfolded the page beside my vow, and I read the letter that had ruined my life. It was addressed to the chieftain of the Eastern Pax. It promised, in plain terms, that once the writer was made Lunar of the Iron Hold, she would see the eastern passes opened and the king's warders drawn back, in exchange for a place at the eastern table when the hold fell. It was treason, complete and damning, the kind of letter that justifies any rejection, any humiliation, any severance spoken before a watching pack. It was signed with my name. It was not my hand. I knew it was not my hand, the way I had known the vow was, instantly, in the body before the mind. Whoever had forged it was good. They had studied me. The slant was close, the closing letters nearly right. But I had spent a winter learning to make my letters even at a table by a window, and the woman who wrote this had learned somewhere else, and the somewhere else was in every stroke. And here is what undid me, kneeling at the king's table with the lie in one hand and my unspoken vow in the other. He had kept them both. The forgery that damned me and the vow that would have bound me. He had kept them side by side, drawn out where his hand could reach, worn soft at the folds. For 4 months, the man who rejected me before his whole kingdom had been sitting alone in the warmest room in his house, comparing the hand that betrayed him to the hand that had promised to love him. And somewhere in those 4 months, he had begun to see what I had seen in an instant. The hands did not match. He had not rejected me. He had rejected a letter. He had stood in that hall with his mother 4 years dead, murdered, I would learn, poisoned at her own table by the same Eastern faction this letter promised the passes to, and he had been handed proof, in what he believed was my hand, that the woman his wolf had chosen was the knife aimed at his heart. And he had done the only thing a king who had already lost 1 lunar to that knife could do. He had made me powerless. He had made me hated. He had severed the bond in public so completely that no faction could ever use me against him again, and he had done it believing he was killing the only thing he had ever wanted in order to keep his kingdom alive. He had been wrong. And he had spent 4 months beginning to suspect he had been wrong, alone, with 2 folded pages, and no idea that the woman in the brown wool dusting his shelves was the one who could have told him the truth in a single sentence. I had come to his house to learn what kind of man rejects his mate before his kingdom. He was the kind who does it to save her from the thing that killed his mother, and then keeps her vow for 4 months because he cannot bear to be the man who threw it away. I folded both pages back exactly as they had been. I did not confront him. I am a coward in precisely one direction, and I had just learned his name was Soren, and not the name I had been calling him in my head for 4 months, which was something closer to enemy. The trouble was that Lady Audra had also spent 4 months learning his attention, and she had felt it turn. And a woman like that does not wait to understand a thing before she destroys it. She moved at the reinstatement. I should explain. With his suspicion growing, and the Eastern grain shipments going where they should not, the king had called a court, a formal reckoning, the whole pack assembled in the same hall where he had severed me, to review the loyalties of the great houses before the Eastern packs grew any bolder. It was meant to be the beginning of him pulling the truth apart, thread by thread. Lady Audra understood, better than he did, that the thread led to her. So she decided the court would end differently than he intended. She had the forger's gift and the forger's nerve. She brought a second letter to that hall, a fresh one, in the same false hand as the first, naming the new Maid Pell as an Eastern agent placed in the household to finish what the disgraced daughter had begun. 2 traitors, 1 story, tidily closed. And she had arranged, with the Eastern chieftain's man, that in the confusion of a maid being dragged from the hall as a spy, a blade would find the king while his guard was looking the wrong way. The same blade, the same table, the same faction that had taken his mother. She would be the grieving, loyal lady left standing beside an empty throne. And the throne does not stay empty long. It nearly worked. That is the part I need you to understand. It very nearly worked. She read her letter to the assembled pack. She named me. The hall turned, 200 faces, to the maid standing at the edge of the hall, and the steward's men started toward me. And across the room I saw the Eastern chieftain's man shift his weight and slide his hand beneath his coat, exactly as another man had once reached beneath his coat for a blade in a different hall. And I understood the whole shape of it in a single breath. I had spent 4 months keeping my eyes down. I had spent 4 months being no one. I had a forged letter in the king's library that did not match my hand, and I had the Eastern grain ledgers in my memory with Lady Audra's own orders written in the margins. And I had a thread to a man across the room that I had been pretending for 4 months I did not feel. I stopped being Pell. I did not shout that I was innocent. Innocence is a thing the accused always claims and the pack has learned to ignore. I crossed the floor instead. The maid, walking up the centre of the hall every eye had just been told to fear. And I did not go to the steward, and I did not go to my own defence. I went to the king, and I put myself between him and the Eastern chieftain's man, in the instant the blade came clear. And I called my wolf. I need to tell you what that cost, because it was not nothing. A severed bond does not want to be reopened. He had closed it in public, completely, the way you were taught to, and for 4 months it had stayed a thread, only because some part of him had refused the last of it. But a thread is not a bond, and what I needed in that hall was the whole thing, all of it, the full weight of a mate bond answered, because that is the one thing on earth that no forged letter and no severance right can argue with. So I tore it back open. I forced the thing he had cut to knit itself whole in the space of a heartbeat, and it fought me the entire way, and it hurt like drowning hurts, from the inside, the body fighting the thing that will save it. There was blood in my mouth where I had bitten through my own lip. I did not feel it bite. And then the bond came whole, and Soren's wolf rose to meet mine in front of the entire assembled pack. The bond he had severed answered, blazing, undeniable, the one sound a pack is built to recognise and forbidden to fake. The Eastern chieftain's man froze with the blade half raised because every wolf in that hall had just dropped, on instinct, into stillness, before a thing older than any of them. The guards had him before he drew his next breath. And the king of the Ironhold turned and looked at the maid bleeding beside his throne. And for the first time in 4 months, his mind heard what his wolf had been screaming since the night I dropped a candlestick in his library. Maron, he said. Not Pell. My name. The name he had severed in this very hall. It came out of him like something breaking. I did the only thing I could think to do, which was the thing I had carried folded in my sleeve for 4 months and never been permitted to say. I had the words by heart. I had written them at a table by a window, in a winter that felt like another woman's life. I spoke my vow, out loud, in the hall where he had taken my voice, in front of the court that had watched him do it, I finally said the thing I had come there to say 4 months and 1 rejection too late. I will not give you the whole of it. Some things are mine. But I will tell you it ended with the line that a Luna speaks to bind herself to a king, and that I spoke it not to the throne and not to the crown, but to the man who had kept my vow on his table because he could not throw away the only true thing anyone had ever offered him. The hall did not breathe. And then the strongest wolf in 3 territories, in front of the pack that had watched him cast me down, did the thing that costs a king more than blood. He went down on one knee to a maid in brown wool, and he took the forged letter from Lady Audra's frozen hand and held it up beside a household ledger any clerk in the room could fetch. And he said, in the voice that was all iron, the voice the hall had learned to fear, "This is not her hand. It was never her hand. I rejected the truest thing in my kingdom on the word of a forgery, and I have known it for a season and lacked the courage to say so. Bring me the woman whose hand this is." They did not have to bring her. The hands matched, and the whole court could see it, and Lady Audra of the Vale did not run. I will give her that. She stood in the centre of the hall she had meant to remake, and watched it close over her like water over a dropped stone. The Eastern chieftain's man was taken by his own escort, who had no wish to die for a treason that had failed in front of 200 witnesses. Lady Audra was given the one mercy the law allows a noblewoman who moves against the throne and loses. She was stripped of her name and her veil, and sent down the eastern road at dawn, into the arms of the faction she had served, who, I am told, were not pleased to receive a woman whose usefulness had so publicly ended. I was not sorry. I had learned, that season, exactly what it costs to put a false name in another woman's hand. The kiss, when it came, was not in that hall. He was not a man who would spend the truest thing he had in front of an audience, and neither, it turned out, was I. It came later, in the warmest room in the house, with the door open and the 2 folded pages on the table between us, and the ink long dry. I will tell you only this about it. I had come to his house certain I needed to learn why he had broken me, so that I could be cured of him and leave. And when he finally chose me, out loud, in his own voice, knowing exactly who I was, what broke open in me was not the wound I had come to nurse. It was the understanding that I had never once, in 4 months of telling myself I stayed because I had nowhere to go, considered that I had stayed because some part of me had always known the hands would not match. That is all I will say about the kiss. Some things are mine. He took up the pen after, and he drew my vow toward him, the page worn soft at the fold, and he asked me, asked, a king, asked, whether he might keep it. I told him he had been keeping it for 4 months without asking, and I did not see why he should start now. The corner of his mouth moved. Up close, it cost him more than a laugh, and was worth more. A year on, the house has the wrong shape, and I am the reason, and I have made my peace with being the reason. The library door does not close anymore. It never had, I have since learned, since the night his mother died, because a man who lost a Luna to a poisoned table learns to keep a sight line to every room he loves. But it is open now for a different reason, and the court has learned to knock on the frame. Mistress Bryony pretends she always knew, and tells anyone who will listen that she hired the next Luna of the Ironhold for the price of a maid, which is true, and which she will not let me forget. Osric still says low things in the gallery to make the corner of the king's mouth move, and I have learned at last what he says, and they are mostly about me, and I have decided to be flattered. The eastern passes are warded twice over now, and the grain goes where it should, and twice a year I take the ledgers down myself and check the margins, because I learned the value of a margin the hard way, and I do not intend to forget it. The keeper of the accounts has stopped complaining. He says the ledgers have never been in better order. That is me. There is a letter on my table this morning from my mother, who did not believe it when the word reached her village that her disgraced daughter had been made Luna of the Iron Hold, and who has written to ask whether it is true, and whether I am writing to her in my own hand, or whether someone is writing for me, because a Luna signs things that matter, and she wants to be sure the signature is mine. It is mine. I have checked it against a page he keeps on his table, worn soft at the fold. It matches. So tell me, before you go, did you know, the first morning I dropped that candlestick, that he would never be able to send me away? Or did you think, as I did, that the safest thing a broken woman can do is put on a false name and keep her eyes on the floor? Stay and tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight, and whether you would have read the letter on his table or left it folded. And if her side of the story is the side you want, the one told by the woman who lived it, in the voice he gave back to her, then you know what the bell does. Press it. I will be here. I have stopped, at long last, keeping my eyes on the floor.